All right, everyone. Hello, my name is Jose Vilson. Me llamo José Luis Vilson. Welcome to the virtual Evolution conference here and I want to thank, of course, the organizers of the Latinx Education Collaborative. Shout outs to y'all. And I want to talk a little bit today about what it means to be an educator of color at this moment in time. And yes, hi, I see you, Justin. I see you, Trinity. Thank you so much. Hola, buenos dias. Shout outs to my people. Shout outs to my people all across the states, wherever you're coming from. But specifically, those of you coming in from from the places where Edgar Palacios and company do their thing. So, to that end, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you. I'm gonna give you some time to trickle in. And I actually should get started now, given that we don't have as much time as I like, but it's all right. So here, all right. We're going to share screen. All right, cool. Application window there, share. Start. All right, cool. So, hi, everybody. First and foremost, I know there's a lot of you who are more Twitter inclined. So if you are, obviously you can at me at the JLV. I'll give you some time to do that. If you were virtual, you'd have about a couple minutes to see people pulling out their cell phones, but you're already in front of a computer by all means. Also, if you are someone who is more Instagram inclined, you'll notice that I'm also at the Jose Vilson. So feel free to at me on there, tag me, etc. You can screenshot any part of this conversation as well as you need to, right? So with that said, if you want to make noise in the chat, if you want to be a little bit more unprofessional in the chat, I would highly appreciate that, because that gives me good feedback about how I'm doing. So please feel free to, give me a shout wherever you can. So here, a couple things. First of all, usually when people ask me, so how did you come into a conference like this to be the keynote? And I usually tell them, well, I've done a couple things here and there. In 2011, I became famous for being the only current classroom teacher to be part of the biggest national opt-out anti-testing movement back in 2011. You'll see my man Pedro Noguera in the background there as well. I've had the opportunity to be part of any number of conversations, including with hopefully the new First Lady, Dr. Joe Biden over here on the corner there. You'll also see that I also wrote a book, This Is Not a Test, a new narrative on race, class, and education. And my opening movement, or should I say my opening event, was actually at the United Federation of Teachers building. And I got to speak to any number of education secretaries. Well, most of them, not the current one, but I did get to speak to a few, including Dr. John King, as well as Secretary Arnie Duncan at the time. So when people ask me, it's like, how did you get to this spot? Are you like a teacher of the year or something? No, I'm not a teacher of the year. I've been a teacher of the state, haven't been a teacher of the city, any of that stuff. So there has been a title, though, that I've just kind of taken on because, it's kind of right there. And I'm not going to really reveal too much, but, I think I'm kind of a big deal. So yes, this is the time when people would usually have something to say, but it's okay. We'll do this virtually. All in all, though, I think what this has really taught me is how important it is to kind of stand in your power, right? And so many of us are asked to think small when we could be so much larger, right? Now, you should also know, too, that I come from, I am Dominican and Haitian and American. So those of us who are hyphenated American, as it were, we recognize that we are often put in situations that may not be as glorious, but we do our best in the situation we're given. So the Lower East Side was a combination of largely a Jewish neighborhood, but then it became Puerto Rican, Lower East Side, right? And we had any number of people, including Dominicans, African Americans, Chinese, specifically Chinese folks, and any number of different cultures. So it was very multicultural at the time. And so in my mind, I was always like, well, this is what the world is kind of supposed to look like, this hodgepodge of different people. And I wasn't always like aware or politically aware at the time. I mean, my sweater and my sweater game was always on point, and my collar, I got it fixed here and there. But generally speaking, I didn't always have the political awareness, that consciousness. So for so many of us who, have that understanding, that's cool. And it's good that we're starting our kids off in this way, but we don't always have that opportunity. Now, what that also meant for me, though, is that I had at least recognized that there were two languages that were spoken in this country. A lot of people say, well, this is the country where languages go to die. And to the contrary, I think there's more than two languages, but there's at least two. And the two are the following. There's the one that you are allowed to speak, predominantly English. And then there's the one that is kind of right there that doesn't get seen, but that's the one that tells you whether or not you get to be a full-fledged citizen in this country. And for those of us who are actually, really bilingual, we recognize that we are not always given the credibility when we speak English because whether it's our accents, whether it's because we are bilingual, because of what we look like, because of our phenotypes, because of our last and first names, we recognize that there is this other language that's not spoken, but it is very implicit in the ways that we consider success. And so when I went to middle school, I was like, okay, it's mostly my people, it's mostly Dominican. It was an all boys school. Really good to be part of it. But then I got to Xavier High School and it was almost all white folks. And I was like, okay, how am I going to survive in this place? So is it either that I'm going to stick to the norms that I had grown up with all my life, or am I going to try to succeed and acculturate? And I chose the latter. And it's unfortunate, but it was the way that I had to, survive. And, I became successful, top 20 in the class, all that other good stuff. Went to Syracuse University, full scholarship. I was really grateful. But I lost a part of myself by trying to succeed under the norms that were given to me, right? And so those are things that we're always thinking about when we are teachers. So when I became that teacher and I started to learn more about my own self and my persona and who I needed to be, I recognized that immediately I needed to own all of me. I needed to own my first name. I needed to own my last name, and I needed to own who I wanted to be in the classroom, in a really large and profound way. I knew that I would not only have to be a good teacher just because I was a Black presenting man coming into the space, but that I also had to come in with all the experiences that I had accumulated over time to make sure that my kids both felt like human beings in the classroom, but then secondly, that they felt like they have the right to get that education regardless and because of who they are, regardless of whatever America wants to say about them. And so I actually wrote a book, This Is Not a Test, a new narrative on race, class, and education, like I mentioned earlier. And so it sold 10,000 plus copies. I'm very, happy about that. And of course, feel free to order that book. And I'll also tell you that this is not something that's brand new. We recognize that we stand on the shoulders of giants, no matter how complicated. And we recognize folks, for example, like a Jaime Escalante, who's being played here by Edward James Olmos. But it isn't just him. It's also just the folks who have been named and unnamed before us. We recognize that there's a legacy long before. So thinking about, for example, Brown versus Board of Education, there was a case just before that with Rodriguez over in the West Coast, where that too was a segregation case. And we also had fought for years and years to make sure that our kids got equitable education wherever they went. You even think to the Young Lords Party and how they were instrumental in assuring that New York City kids got free breakfast. And of course, the NYC Department of Education took on that role after the Young Lords Party had eventually institutionalized it within spaces like East Harlem, where I live now. So we are a big part of what it means to be educated in this country, but we don't often get that lecture told to us. Yeah. Now, there's also something about equity that I do want to discuss before I move on, and that's this. We've seen this graphic before. I'm sure many of you have, and that's great. Equity is a thing that is relatively new in the landscape of this discussion, because really, we've always been looking at equality as a thing to be, and really, I don't think we've even achieved equality yet. But when we talk about equity, we're trying to say, okay, well, if equality means that everybody gets the same number of boxes, no matter who they are, then that means equity means that everybody gets the amount of boxes that they should be able to get in order to see this game that's in the back. Yeah. And there's a bunch of different renditions out there. I'm going to just show a couple. You'll recognize with justice on the right-hand side, which is one of my favorite, by the way, is that we're actually interrogating the gates that allow us or don't allow us into the game. It is not enough to just say, well, we just need more boxes. In fact, I think we need to interrogate the gate more often so that we can have a better sense of how more folks can get into this game, or at least get to see it. But of course, we also recognize we have a couple of issues going on right now. And so, there's a lot of different people who are ticking all the boxes and not necessarily sharing them with everybody else. And so in the ways that we can contribute to assuring that people get the boxes that they deserve, and then assure that everybody else understands that having too many boxes is a problem for everybody. So when we discuss issues of equity, we need to keep that in mind. So for me, I think about equality as, having the same number of boxes, equity, making sure that everybody has the boxes that they deserve, justice, meaning that we interrogate that fence and maybe even change that fence so that we don't necessarily need those boxes. And then liberation would necessarily mean two things. Either that the students are no longer going to have the gate in front of them that keeps them from succeeding in whatever game is being played, or that students have an equal chance at getting into that game, whether they are able to acclimate more into baseball or whether football or any number of different sports, if they're given an equal opportunity to get into those games. Because for what it is, right, for what it's worth, we recognize that sometimes fences are built, and then even if you remove the fence, people still play by the rules of the fence. Yeah, that's a sociological standpoint there. Now, we can plan for our children. We can plan and envision all we want, but so much of our power lies in how we unearth our purpose in the world around us. And I think that's the message I want to leave to everybody here, is thinking about how we can make sure that when we plan for things, that we're actually putting our full person into that plan, right? And so here's something for you to think about. All right, I've taught for the better part of 15 years in Washington Heights. Shout outs to Washington Heights. Shout outs to my Dominican folks. I see you out there. I taught for the most part, I was teaching Latinx kids, and not even just Latinx, but Dominican students, El Salvadorian students, Mexican students who identified as Latinx or Hispanic, first generation, mostly English language learners, multilingual learners, and even with the majority of them were, I guess they would consider special needs, right? Because I'm trying to change the lingo and it gets updated regularly. Given all that, I was often under the impression that we could actually teach kids to be more self-affirming and independent if we just gave them the right times, right? But of course, I would do engagements like this, and I'd be really nervous about leaving them on their own to be able to do these things. So I was always like, oh my gosh, please don't ruin my things. I'm very nervous. Don't do this to me. But fine. What I ended up coming back to, however, after having prepped them for about a month and change, was with these really awesome projects. And a little backstory, the project was about scientific notation and distance of the planets. So I was doing that with my 8th graders, who a lot of people did not have high expectations for. They said, well, if you just give them like numbers and just make them fill in bubble sheets, then they should be fine. They should get their learning. And I wanted to do something deeper than that. And deeper they went. To that end, right, that you'll notice that they were able to make their own estimations. The distances weren't correct at first, but at the very least, they started to really think about the estimations first. And then we were able to actually build out from that learning and say, hey, like, what do you want to do with this? How do you want to approach this situation? And as they're modeling, they're talking to one another, to the point where, I had these 2 days when I was away. I came back and the students barely noticed I was there. I'm big, so I guess they did notice, but in the way of saying that they were able to be more self-affirming in their own learning without me. And these are students you see in the middle, for example, a couple of my boys there, in other classes, didn't necessarily know how to react or act to whoever the authority figure is, right? But that's also because they needed a lot of love and a lot of care and a lot of affirmation. And so I was able to affirm that for them. They wanted to use iPads, go use them. They want to use their cell phones to kind of do estimations, by all means. But I gave them that power, but then they also took that power as well. And so that gap between schooling and education isn't actually about what the achievement gap is. That's not even a lingo for me. For me, there's a gap in how much we actually expect of the children that are in front of us, especially if they are Latinx, especially if they are underprivileged and under-resourced and disenfranchised. So in that thinking, right, I want people to keep this in mind too. We have a lot of English language learners and multilingual learners who could be teaching us about things. So at a point that the same year, same students, right? they were like, well, Mr. Vilson, now that you taught us how to do this, I bet you I know how to teach. I was like, okay, cool. So I took a couple days. I started thinking about what I would do. And I said, all right, everybody here is going to teach a lesson for their final project. What? Like, yeah, that's what you're going to do. You're going to end this year with the final project where you have to teach. And lo and behold, you look at my students on the left, for example, who super shy throughout the year. They had just learned how to speak English like the year before, but they were actually doing so well because they were given the opportunity to just speak on their own terms. And yes, I let them switch between English and Spanish because I was like, one, I know how to speak Spanish, but then two, because what mattered more was whether or not they were able to give the content that they wanted to give, right? And they had already seen me teach time and time again. So even the students who usually fool around, like you see in the middle, they actually turned in really good projects because they saw how much I wanted to invest in them. And so a big disclaimer, by the way, I don't think I'm the only one who can do this. In fact, this is why I'm giving this speech. I think you can do it too. I am consistently insecure about whether or not my students know the material. And I have to trust them, even when we're both wrong. And that's the best thing about it too. Like if I make a mistake and a student corrects me, great. That means they were paying attention. That means that we were both doing the job that we're supposed to be doing. Yeah. And I've done this for 15 years and I'm still learning, which is why now I'm a doctoral student at Teachers College, Columbia University, right? Because I really wanted to get deeper about my learning. Yeah. And I'm still doing this under a regime that is hyper constricting because the superintendent at this moment is still trying to prescribe how math teaching is supposed to look like. So in this way, I had to let it go. Yeah, that's my break. Some of you are kind of triggered because you're like, man, my kids listen to that all the time. But anyway, student voice and choice is embedded in adult culture and principles. If we're not able to give up the power, how do we expect our students to see themselves as independent? How? We can't. We have to be able to allow them to see themselves as educators, as teachers. This is beyond ballot. This is actually thinking about the contemporary times and how students can actually do their own learning on their own, right? But we are there to help facilitate that learning and help them understand and make sense of the world around them. Yeah. And I'm still, I was still getting in trouble. That's the way that this works. Like anti-racism and trying to be anti-racist isn't a fad. It is a thing where you try your best to just test the margins of just how much you can push the system, because you keep pushing up against it. That's when you know you're doing the good work. If people feel comfortable around you as you're saying anti-racist things, maybe you're not being anti-racist enough. Maybe you're not being dangerous enough. So something for you to consider as you do this work. And then, of course, those of us who have been doing the work, then they wonder why we leave at a faster rates than our actual counterparts, right? So all that said, I actually want us to think a little bit about how we move in the classroom too. You have to think about these questions as you move about. Do you see them as people or do you see them as numbers? Do you separate children based on academic issues versus discipline issues? And then who's on those lists? Are we interrogating that on a real basis? Do you tune into their identities? Do you actually see them for the people that they actually are? And that's especially for my white folks out there. And it's also for my educators of color out there. It's for everybody, right? How do we define grit? Because for some students, yes, they do need to learn how to work harder in the things that they do. But for so many of our kids, just getting into the classroom is grit enough. Yeah. And then I know that some of you have been pushed onto this ideology of teach like a champion. And I want us to push and interrogate that a little bit more, because when you say teach like a champion, that means who's winning in that situation? Who's winning? And oftentimes it's not the student. Oftentimes it is the teacher who gets 100% control, and then students get, again, left behind in really awful ways. And so to that end, I want to take 5 seconds, right? So even when you're like trying to think about discipline, do you take 5 seconds and ask why that's happening? That's a good tip for life. But of course, I learned that life when I got into the classroom and I learned how to be a better teacher. And I'm not really asking y'all to like be in there and, be the coolest teacher of all time. If you're this person, then by all means be that person. I love it. But if you're somebody who doesn't know how to rap, then don't rap. I don't want y'all spitting bars if you can't do that, okay? If you're much better at singing, then you should go ahead and sing in the classroom. If you're somebody who knows how to knit, then you should know how to knit in the classroom. But I'm not asking you to do things above the things that you already do. Like, you're not trying to be Mr. or Mrs. or MX TikTok, right? You're trying to be the person, the best teacher possible for the students. And that's a really big deal when it comes to this equity situation. Understanding, of course, that we have to create the environment. Don't wait. Love them on day one. And if you didn't get a chance to love them on day one, start loving them as soon as you get back into that classroom. Greet them as people first, students second. So even when issues arise, you learn how to not take it personally because you already treated them like people. And then the student part will inevitably, fall in from the things that you did when you treated them as people. Save the yelling. You don't need to yell. And matter of fact, I think the best disciplinarians I've ever seen actually make their voices quieter, because when they make it quieter, right, then it gets more serious, and then everybody knows to calm it down a little bit. Just saying. Become increasingly unnecessary. That is the job of the best teachers I've seen. We have to make sure that we're not just teaching for our specific grade, our specific content, but so that the students, wherever they go after us, that they know how to be self-motivated because of the things that we've taught them. As an 8th grade teacher, I wasn't just thinking about 8th grade. I was thinking about what would happen in 9th grade if they didn't get somebody like me. And that's always been the target for me, because I knew that algebra that first year is a problem area for so many of our kids who eventually drop out. So to that end, I'm moving along. Sometimes we have to ask questions and just walk away. We have to be okay with walking away. That's the part about giving away power too. And of course, I want to offer a little bit of hope, because I know this moment is really, really tough for so many of us right now. We have any number of crises, including a pandemic. We have economic exacerbation, especially the stratification that we see right now. We see issues related to immigration and policies that often feel like they're out of our control. We have the shooting of unarmed Black people all across this country. And it also extends to our Latinx folks, our Native American, First Indigenous folks. So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But I did want to offer hope, because hope isn't a tool that we just pull out when it's sunny. We always want to have it. It's always going to be on the passenger side of the car that we drive. We're helping students create change for themselves. That's such a critical part of what we're doing, yeah? And then the work is more than just the rubrics. And, Charlotte Danielson's probably read my piece about that, but it's facts. Charlotte Danielson cannot teach me how to teach. I teach me how to teach. My students teach me how to teach. The parents and the communities that I'm in teach me how to teach. And that is where I derive my hope from. They cannot give me that. I have to be able to plant it within myself and let the plants spring forth from the things that I've pulled in from the communities that I serve. And so one of the ways that I've been able to engage that, thankfully, is through Educolor. Educolor being an organization that's been around for the better part of about 6-7 years now. We have any number of resources that are available to everybody. If you want to hop in that website, feel free to do so after I finish talking. We have a chat every last Thursday of every month, except without the holidays, because, when it comes to Thanksgiving, I got to get my pavo. When it comes to Christmas, I got to get my pending. Like, don't play with me around that time. But if it's any other time, then we're usually on for that last Thursday. And then we're also going to have a membership site really coming soon. Should I have revealed that now? Oh, well, I would love for everybody to be able to join in when the opportunity comes really, really soon. So hop in whenever you get a chance. And of course, our gifts are always popping. We are really out here. Y'all know. And we also give ourselves a chance to celebrate, right? Because often we don't get a chance to celebrate each other and the things that we do for one another, which is why this space right here with the Latinx Education Collaborative is so powerful, because you get to celebrate you, and in spaces that don't often love us back. And so something for us to think about too. That hope is derived from the struggle that we're currently seeing now. We need to do more learning. We need to think about the students, for example, our LGBTQIA plus folks who are teaching us how to be more inclusive in really profound ways. Our students who have either come in from the margins, from the borders, and have been frankly, like, oppressed over at the borders and the cages that they're in right now. We think about them and how so many of them actually come into our classrooms, don't get to say a thing about it, and yet we have to be there for them. For so many of our Black students who see what's happening on the news but don't see real action happening when it's happening to their parents, they're happening to their loved ones, happening to their own peers, often time and time again. And then we think about our non-Christian folks as well, our Muslim folks, our Buddhist folks, our Jewish folks, any number of different religions that are not centered, and think about how all of these different folks across disability lines as well make us more inclusive and make us better teachers, which in turn makes us better people. And so this became even more urgent 8 years ago when I became a father of my son, Alejandro. And by the way, I tell everybody, my wife is a much better educator than I am. Shout out to Luz. I'm sure she's going to watch this later on. She's out in the living room somewhere. But thinking about my own son, I always knew that this work was urgent, but I hadn't recognized just how deep it was to send your own child into a school and hoping that they would love their children back in this way. So whoever you're teaching, understand you're not just teaching the 30, 60, 150 students who you have in the classroom, you are also teaching my child. And conversely, I am also teaching your children, regardless of whether or not you have your own blood as children or not, because inevitably they are all connected. The decisions that so many of our children make in our classrooms will affect children all across the country. And if you are somebody who is teaching white children, this matters even more because they also need culturally responsive and sustaining education. They also need anti-racist education. They also need teachers who love them back and to show the world that love, because that is the way that we're going to be able to move the culture to be more inclusive. And so when I look at my own son and I send him to the local public school, I recognize I am making an investment, not just in him, but all the kids who are in the classroom with him and all the kids who are being served right now across the entire country and perhaps the world right now, because the decisions he makes may directly or indirectly affect the things that happen with everybody around here. So with that said, I would like to thank you. I want to thank you for being part of the world's greatest profession, in my opinion, and for being somebody who's in the struggle with me wherever you are in this journey with us. Because so many of us don't get to see ourselves. It's really hard right now because we are physically distanced. You hear the ambulances still coming through on a daily basis, and yet we are struggling with one another. We are working with one another to make this possible. I want to thank you for your time and energies, and I'd love to see this chat window now. Thank you so much. Ah, yes. Thank you all. Thank you all. See, I love that. I'm gonna Jorge. I love what you said about Dr. Tony Dickerson teaching all children like they were your own. That's exactly right. Um, Yes, we are teaching the whole family unit. Recognizing too that I actually live next to a church, which is why you hear like the bagpipes in the back. So that's my theme music for right now. Hope you can rock with it. It's not Jay-Z, but it'll have to do for now. It's not Juan Luis Guerra, but it'll have to do. We need more learning opportunities. Thank you, Cecilia, for that. It's true. The parents do teach us, Christy, in a really profound way. I have like 2 minutes. I went kind of fast thinking that this is going to go slow. Great. Listen, y'all. And I also want to say, I have to say this because it is so critical. Oh, appreciate it. Okay, great. All right. I also want to say this too before we go, because I think I have 2 minutes left. Is it? I see. I asked a question. There's a question. Well, yes, I hope there is a recording. Okay, love it. They got it. Now, last thing before I go, and I see Sharice out there. Okay, Sharice McBride, I see you. Everybody. So one last thing. Like I always say, feel free to reach out to me if you have questions around pedagogy. I'm not just about the math. I love math, but we could talk about anything. And secondly, I also want to make sure too, right, that y'all keep building this up. Do not let folks, adults out there, tell you that they're the only ones that you're supposed to turn to when it comes to situations. I want to make sure I am part of this community in the best ways possible. So do share your learning at Latinx Edco and then hashtag EVO 2020. Make sure that you're putting in the work with one another, making sure you're doing that networking in the best ways possible too, because if I could just get everybody who's in the chat right now into one room, and I tell this to everybody, some people take me on that offer, some people don't, but that's all good. If I could take all the folks in this room right now and try to build a better education system for our kids, I bet you I would. And as a matter of fact, that's the sort of energy we always need to come in with. And we can donate maybe an hour. We want to donate maybe 2 or 3. We want to donate maybe like a whole week to just building a better education system. I would do it with the folks who I'm currently speaking to. So again, if you have questions, you have concerns, feel free to throw me a line. Other than that, feel free to throw me a question too in the ask a question box. Just see. Okay, great. Yeah, see, look at that. That's right. Let's get together. Let's build something. I love it. Gracias por ser un guerrero de la educación cada día. Francisco, ya tú sabes. Paco, can I? Yes, absolutely. Impactful thought. Thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate you. We'll be okay. We're going to do some breakout rooms shortly. That's dope. I'm happy about that. Yes. So, right. So shout outs to Miles. I see you out there, Miles. I see you out there. So we have some really good work to do too, don't we? Like when I tell you about building communities and really being thoughtful about that, I am really considering expanding into the spaces that y'all occupy. So in the ways that we can collaborate, I'm all for it. Lisa, thank you so much. Yes, we need to get hype. It's real out here. It is real out here, as my kids would do. This is great. Let's see. Okay. Thank you. Where is the place you would want us to go? Okay, so me personally, I mean, I'm a fan of Twitter. I'm a fan of Instagram. But like I said, there is going to be a platform very shortly. If I'm you, I would go to educolor.org, sign up for the newsletter. We're actually going to put out a way for folks to come together in this way. So everybody can talk asynchronously about education with people from across the country and actually from in Canada and across the hemisphere, hopefully. So we're going to start gathering folks real soon. But for the time being, if you want to go to educolor.org, sign up for the newsletter, throw your email in there. We'll be able to reach out to you shortly about like developing real communities and having conversations across the country. And I'm really interested. Oh, I'm sorry. I see you. Really interested in making sure that everybody continues this work right here. So again, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Jose, thank you so much for joining us today. Remember, continue to engage with us using the chat. And now let's move into our morning breakouts.
What's up, everybody? It is taking us a long time to learn how to do this well, so we're going to make it super simple for you. You're going to see what I'm sharing here momentarily. Fantastic. I think I figured out how Zoom works because it's been 8 months of using it. I still struggle sometimes, but here we go. Super simple to go to your favorite breakout session. Just go to the top left of the screen here. Click right there. You'll see a listing of all the breakout sessions come up. Search for the breakout session that you want to attend. Click right there. I chose Eva Santiago's self-care because, quite frankly, I think we need a little bit of self-care in our lives these days. And that's it. Don't worry about coming into the main space. Actually, I'm not going to enable my camera or mic either. That's not for me to do. So now we're here. Don't worry about coming into the main space because we'll take care of that for you.